I didn't go through Kansas, but I came upon an article that talked about unusual laws that are still on the book in Kansas. Now, I didn't do any fact-checking here or anything like that, and I don't know how accurate the article was, or even how old the article is, and whether or not these are still currently. I don't think the article is that old, but it would be something if these were still on the books. But listen to what it says. Laws that are still on the books in Kansas, in the state of Kansas, in Derby, Kansas, it is illegal to hit a vending machine that stole your money. It's on the books. Now, I'll tell you something that happened to me in Nashville. We went down the Nashville way and went through Memphis. We saw the King's house. You know who I'm talking about, right? Down there in Memphis. Thank you very much. You know what I'm talking about, right? Graceland. But anyhow, I was in Nashville, and of course, you can't do too much driving around Nashville in a moving truck. So we parked, and we went over to the little box or the little machine where you pay for your parking, and it was an automatic thing, and I didn't read the thing, and I had some cash. Oh, it only cost $6 for this amount of time, so I just put a regular, just a $20 bill in, and then after I put it in, then I saw the sign, doesn't give change. And that about made me sick, so I wanted to hit something, but it wasn't the thing's fault, it was my fault. I should have hit myself, right? So I lost $20 or $14 anyhow, went to waste, but anyhow, it's in Derby, it's illegal to hit a vending machine that stole your money. So watch out if you're in Derby. Don't hit the vending machines. In Dodge City, it's illegal to spit on the sidewalk. Illegal. You're breaking the law if you spit on the sidewalk. In Lawrence, it is illegal to wear a bee in your hat. Like a bee. That's what I say. And all cars entering Lawrence must sound their horn to warn the horses of their arrival. Now, these are laws that are still on the books, I guess. In Topeka, it's illegal to sing the alphabet on the streets at night. And dead chickens can't be hauled across Kansas Avenue. And finally, in Topeka, you can't yell at haunted houses. Now, I didn't do a fact check, and I don't know how accurate these things are, but it's kind of crazy. And then in Wichita, the last one in Wichita, before proceeding through the intersection of Douglas and Broadway, a motorist is required to get out of their car and fire 3 shotgun rounds into the air. I don't know. It's kind of bogus, I think, but it's interesting. You know, whether those are real laws or true, they are useless laws. And I'm sure we can think of some useless laws that we do know for sure, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that are on the books. There is such a thing as useless laws. Well, there are some laws that we're speaking about today and for the next several weeks that we're going to be talking about as we look at laws that are regarded by Christ followers and other faiths as foundational laws that are a must-have for any society to function. That are a must-have for any society to practice justice and fairness and liberty. Laws that must be on the book. If not in our U.S. Constitution or other countries' constitutions, but in our hearts, the laws of God. And we're talking about the 10 Commandments. And for the course of this series, we're probably going to be, don't know if we're going to do it every Sunday, but hopefully we can memorize the 10 Commandments, because I asked last week as we started this series, how many of you know the 10 Commandments by heart? And I don't know if all of us do or not, so we're going to be running through those. Caleb, we're going to get those up on the screen, and we're just going to run through them. Fast forward through that. Fast forward through that. That was a lack of my communication. That should have been the very first thing, but that's okay. Go ahead and skip through that. One more. Okay, we're going to recite these. Let's do them in unison. Number one, commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods. Law number 2, you shall not make for yourself a graven image. Commandment number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Commandment number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Commandment number 5, honor your father and your mother. Commandment number 6, you shall not kill. Commandment number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Commandment number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And then finally, commandment number 10, you shall not covet. The 10 Commandments. Last week, we said our goal in this series is to view God's law not as what He requires as much, although that is certainly true and that is certainly the case, but viewing them rather as what God desires as well. We see them as what God requires, but more than that, I want us to see that these are things that God desires to see in our lives, to see displayed in our lives, the things that please Him. This is the nature of love for God, to desire to be pleasing to the Lord. And so the reason why the title of the series is the 10 attitudes of the heart. They're attitudes. They ought to be attitudes, because the commandments were never meant to simply be obeyed in action only. They're never meant just to be obeyed in action only. They were meant to be actions that flowed from an attitude of our hearts. These laws, these commandments that God wrote Himself with His own finger on stone tablets. Foundational thought today, truth, if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. Before God addresses our obedience, He reminds us of our deliverance. Before God reminds us or addresses our obedience, He reminds us of our deliverance, His work in delivering us. As we start and we begin to get into the commandments one by one, it's interesting and it's very important that we highlight this truth as God begins to give His commandments, His laws to His people. This truth. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, it's there in your notes. God says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Children, I've got some things I want you to hear. I've got some instructions, some laws that I want you to obey, the things that I desire to see out of your life. But please know this first. Focus on this. If you make this the focus of your life, this will drive you to obedience. And it is this, that I am your God, and I have delivered you from the land of slavery. I have overcome your obstacles. I have broken the chains of bondage that held you captive, and I have freed you. Now, listen to what I have to say in regards to the way you conduct and live your lives. Because here lies the motive for why we seek to please Him. Here lies the motive for why we seek to please Him. The prefix of every act of obedience. God doesn't want just cold, mindless ritual. He doesn't want just cold, mindless ritual. He longs for a relationship of a reciprocating response, We focus on His love and we reciprocate back to him our gratitude and our worship and our love and our devotion. You see, we can put this statement behind each of those commandments that we highlighted. For I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall not make for yourself an engraven. And we can go down the whole list, and we can put that as a prefix of why we should do what God is asking us to do. That is the driving motive. It is always what God has done for us that motivates, that ought to be the motivating factor. It's never to earn his favor, because he says right up the very beginning, you already have my favor. You don't have to earn it. You can't earn it. You're already loved. You're already favored. And so our motive for obeying his commands or his law is never and can never be to earn his love or to earn his favor or to earn our way to heaven. It is always out of response because of what he has first done for us. We love it's not that we love, but that he loved and first loved us and gave himself for us. We are able to love because he first loved us. We are able to forgive. We can have the power and the ability to forgive. Why? Because he first forgave us. Amen? It is always his actions to us that empower us to be able to do what he has called us to do. And so let's get into the first commandment. Commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. And we're going to try, I was going to try to do both 1 and 2, but I don't think I'm going to get to 2 today, but we're going to focus on number 1. Number 2, commandment number 2 and number 1 they kind of go hand in hand, but we're going to be focusing predominantly on this command this morning. You shall have no other gods before me. Why would God have to give this instruction to his people? Why would God have to give this instruction to his people? Well, let's take a little bit of a lesson here. We're going to get a little bit academic here. Okay, there was an evolving view of God throughout civilization, especially in particular throughout the Old Testament. And I'm going to give you some terms this morning, and I'll explain them. But they're how people viewed God, their understanding of God. In the earliest of civilization, people understood God differently than what we would view God today. There's a term, and the term is this, if you're taking notes, it's polytheism. The term polytheism is a term that denotes the belief in many gods. Poly means many. Theism means God. Polytheism, the belief in many gods. In ancient cultures and civilization, you would have people who would believe in multitudes, hundreds of gods. You'd have a god for the sun. You'd have a moon god. You'd have a god of the seas and rain, and a god of harvest. And you'd have a fertility god, and he or she or it or whatever would bless you with many children or whatever. And so you'd have all these different gods, and you'd find yourself, well, you would perform sacrifice for this god and this god and this god, and all these different sacrifices. And quite often it seemed to be always a tension between the gods. And in fact, you see a lot of that same philosophy in Greek mythology and that type of thing. There are religions today who do believe in multiple gods. They are polytheistic. In their viewpoints, a lot of your Hindu religions will believe in multiple gods and so forth. And so, from the earliest of times, it was accepted and embraced that there are multiple gods in our world and in our universe. But then it evolved into what is called henotheism. That's the next one, if you're taking notes. It's the term henotheism. That's the belief in one God, but without disbelieving in other gods. So it's similar to polytheism in the sense that it accepts other gods, multiple gods, but it pretty much claims one God as their God without saying, well, okay, over in this land, they have their own God, but our God is this God. And you see a lot of that in the Old Testament, where at this stage a nation would accept one God as its God and would worship no other God. So you have the God of Israel, but you might also have the God of the Amorites and so forth. And you see even in early Israeli understanding in history, they would acknowledge these other gods in these other lands. They would acknowledge the gods that the Canaanites worshipped and the Amorites and that type of thing. And so it was even accepted, it seemed to be accepted even among the Israelites. And it was their understanding of the world at the time. Every territory had its own god that they would worship. They wouldn't worship other gods. They would worship that one God in their territory. And victory in battle between two nations ultimately was a victory of one nation's God over another nation's God. I mean, we see kind of this practice, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and how he overcame the gods of Egypt. You know the story. We see Elijah on top of Mount Carmel, and he's having this contest with the prophets of Baal, who was a Canaanite god and that type of thing, and it's like they're having this contest. Elijah say, "Hey, let's see whose God is bigger." Okay, whatever God answers by fire is the true God. He is the powerful God. And so there was this going back and forth. There was this idea, this understanding that there were multiple gods in the world, but each territory had their one God that they believed in and the one God that they worshiped. And then it kind of progressed and evolved into monotheism. The term is monotheism in your notes. It's the belief that there is only one God. Heno means one, but mono means single or alone. It means one too, but it denotes being single or alone. The belief that there is only one God who stands alone. There is no other God. There is no other God. And from the beginning, revelation, that is God revealing himself to humanity, has been progressive in the sense that it has been unfolding. From the beginning, God's revelation of himself has been unfolding, and mankind's understanding of him has been unfolding. It's been progressive until the fullness of time when God came and would reveal himself in the fullness of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the ultimate revelation of the person of God in our human understanding. For it says in Colossians chapter 2, verse 9, "For in Christ lives all the fullness of God in a human body." The Son, it says in Hebrews 1:3, the Son is the radiance of God's glory in the exact representation of his being. So therefore, we say today, as Christians, we believe revelation is no longer progressing. Our full understanding of who God is in the person of Jesus Christ. He is the most and final revelation that we have of Jesus Christ in this life. Now, no doubt, when we all get to heaven, that revelation of who God is going to explode. We're going to see things in heaven. We're going to have understandings about God and his workings when we get to heaven that will blow our mind. We could not contain it here in our earthly mindset. But when we get to heaven, our eyes will be opened to the fullness of God. And even then, I believe, it will take all eternity to be able to comprehend the greatness of our God. But before Christ, man's understanding of God was evolving, and this is evident, as we've said, throughout the Old Testament. But why was it important? Let's just start asking some questions here. Why was it important for man to come to this point in their understanding of God, that God is one God? He is the only God, a monotheistic view. God is the only God who stands alone. There is no other God. William Barclay says this concerning this issue. He says, if religion was ever really to mean anything to a man in all circumstances of his life, this stage had to come. His understanding had to be able to evolve to this point to grasp this. If a man left his God behind when he left his native land, his religion was but a broken reed, especially in the bitter days of the exile, when the children of Israel were in captivity in some other land. They were away from their territory where their God dwells, right? According to the henotheistic viewpoint, there's one God, but he only dwells in certain territories. In the bitter days of the exile, the people of Israel had to learn to think of God as with them, not just in Palestine, but even in the distant and strange lands. God, the true God, is not a God who simply dwells in just certain territories, but he is everywhere. The monotheistic view of God, that there is only one God who stands alone and above all other powers, was the psalmist viewpoint in Psalm 139 there in your notes. Let's read that. Follow along with me this morning. O Lord, you have examined my heart, and you know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say even before I say it. Lord, you go before me and follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. I can never escape from your spirits. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to the heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride on the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me and strengthen, and your strength will support me. I could ask the darkness to hide me and the light around me to become night, but even in darkness I cannot hide from you. To you the night shines as bright as the day. Darkness and light are the same to you. He is the God who is everywhere. He is a God that is not bound by territories. This is a place where God wanted to take Israel when he gave them this command on the mountain of God. He was the God whose presence was not accessed only in particular regions of the world or in certain objects or only in particular circumstances or seasons of life. He was the one and the only God whose presence was everywhere and whose power is sufficient in every circumstance. This understanding of God continued to unfold in Israel, in the life of Israel, as God continued to show himself as the one who was able to deliver time and time and time again, the one whose glory was unmatched by any other power or force in this world. You shall have no other gods before me. Yet the irony behind all of this, that this point seemed to be one of Israel's biggest downfalls. When you look at Israel's history, it seems to be one of their biggest downfalls, the worshiping of other gods. They did put other gods before them time and time again, even before the 10 Commandments were hot off the press, so to speak. Before Moses even made it down the mountain to deliver the law of God to his people, Israel had already broken the first command. Israel had already abandoned the one true God and went after another God. Let's look at it. Israel had already abandoned God in worshiping a God of their own making. Let's look at what it says in Exodus 32, verses 1 through 4. It's there in your notes. It says, when the people saw how long it was taking Moses, they were getting impatient. They were getting tired of waiting. It says, when the people saw how long it was taking Moses to come back down the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, who was the priestly figure. He was Moses' right hand. They gathered around Aaron and said, come on, make us some gods who can lead us. We don't know what happened to this fellow Moses who brought us here from the land of Egypt. We have no idea what happened to this guy. So we're going to improvise. We're tired of waiting. We're tired of waiting to see what Moses is going to do. We're going to take matters in our own hands. And so Aaron said, take the gold rings from the ears of your wives and sons and daughters and bring them to me. And then all the people took the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then Aaron took the gold, melted it down, and molded it into the shape of a calf. And it says, when the people saw it, they exclaimed, O Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt. These are the gods. We're tired of waiting on Moses and his God. Do we ever abandon the one true God when we grow impatient with him? When we don't think he's going fast enough to suit our fancy, as they say down in the South, I think. Do we ever disown or abandon the one true God when we don't think he's doing what we think he ought to be doing? When he's working in ways that are contrary to our own understanding and logic? Do we ever abandon the one true God? Do we ever move on, so to speak, to other things or go our own way in fashioning other gods of our own making? Going our own way and fashioning gods of our own making. You shall have no other gods before me. That the term before me literally means before my face, before my sight. And for something to be out of God's sight, as we read in the Psalms, for something to be out of God's sight, because God sees everything. There's no place where we can go where we can be out of the presence of God, where we'll be out of his sight. And so, therefore, in order for something to be out of God's sight, it literally means it cannot exist. You shall have no other gods before me. Have we ever erected other gods of our own making in our lives? These are things that we give ourselves over to. These are things that drive us. These are things that we count as most important to us, that are even more valuable to us than God himself. And the second commandment deals specifically with you shall not have engraven images or idols of things, and you shall not bow down and worship idols. And that's essentially what that's talking about. Idols that we produce of our own making in our lives. Things that we give more credit to God. When God isn't doing what I think he ought to do, or in the time frame that I think he ought to be doing it, I'm going to fashion gods from my own understanding and in my own image of my own making, and I'm going to take matters in my own hands, and I'm going to take control of my own life, and I'm going to lead life on my own, by myself. Forget God. I don't know what happened to this Moses fellow, but I'm going to take matters in my own hands. That is essentially fashioning a God of our own making. That is essentially taking whatever resources we have and melting it down and erecting our own God. Make us some gods who can lead us, they said to Aaron. You see, we ultimately, when we fashion these gods of our own making, we're fashioning them out of our own resources. What is that essentially saying? We ultimately want to lead our own lives. Make us some gods who will lead us. And essentially, that's what the people are saying. We want to lead with our own strength, with our own understanding, with our own resources. We want to be in control. We ultimately want to become our own God. See, there's a reason why this is the first command. Because everything else builds on this first command. Everything builds on this first one. Again, William Barclay says this: it is a first necessity to get the idea of God right. For a man will quite inevitably become like the God he worships. If our view of God is a God of just pure judgment and vindictive, then maybe we're going to have, our conduct is going to be that of which we are very stern and strict and unmerciful and uncompassionate. If our view of God is a God who he's all about love, and he just oh well, God will just automatically forgive. We talked about that a little bit last week, and chances are our life isn't going to have any type of standards. or boundaries. If our God is a God of materialism, then chances are, then our life is going to display a constant striving to get more stuff. The God that we erect of materialism. He says it is the first necessity to get the idea of God. Who is your God? For a man will quite inevitably become like the God he worships. A man's God dictates a man's conduct consciously or unconsciously. And so the question presents itself. The pressing question must be, who is your God? Is it the God of your own making and choosing? Or is it the God who first chose you and has redeemed you from the land of slavery? Brother Kyle, I'm going to ask you to come this morning, and Shirley and Carol. That's a pressing question, and it's a fitting question as we consider, as we really get into the beginning stages of this series. Because, as I said, everything really from here on out builds on this first command. Who is your God? It really becomes an issue, is God got a hold of you? Are you being led of God? Or are you seeking to build other gods to lead you? Gods of your own choosing, gods of your own making. And so we ask the Lord through the psalmist this morning in Psalm 19, reveal the hidden faults in our hearts. Keep us from willful sins. Perhaps you're here this morning, and as we look at God's law this morning, again, it's not a, we're not going to view it as a checklist. We're going to check this off the box. Okay, I did this. We're going to check it off the box. It's an attitude of the heart. It's what God desires. What is our attitude? Is God, as we sung as the deer, the song as the deer, is He our only desire? Is He our one? As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after Thee. My soul thirsts for the God, the living God. Is He our God this morning? Let's stand this morning. The altars are open. If you're here this morning, you just need to pray. I'm going to invite you to come this morning as Kyle leads and sings. But let the Lord lead you. Open your heart to Him this morning. Let Him lead you. And let us first consider the fact that before He gets into our obedience, He reminds us of our deliverance. Be reminded this morning of what God has done for you, and allow that to drive you to your knees. If there's anything that you identify in your life, yes, God, I have made this thing my God. I've erected this thing because you weren't moving fast enough, or you weren't doing things like I thought you should, and so I took matters in my own hands. Perhaps you need to pray this morning, confess that, and ask the Lord to revive your heart this morning. Brother Kyle, lead us as he sings.